The clock on the wall showed 11:45 p.m., almost midnight. I wiped down the last of the tables at the diner, my movements automatic and weary. It had been a long shift, and the night was growing colder by the minute. The few remaining customers were regulars who knew the drill. Eat, chat, leave. Finally they did, and I locked the door behind them, flipping the sign to closed. "See you tomorrow, Lily," called my boss Betty from the kitchen. Her voice was muffled by the clatter of dishes. "Good night, Betty," I replied, grabbing my coat. The diner was situated on a desolate stretch of highway, miles away from the nearest town. It was a lonely drive home, but one I was accustomed to. I'd been working here for nearly a year, and the drive had never bothered me, until tonight. As I slid into my old sedan and turned the key, the engine sputtered to life. I turned on the headlights, illuminating the empty parking lot and the dark expanse beyond. Taking a deep breath, I pulled onto the highway, the diner quickly vanishing in the rearview mirror. The road stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the night. Trees loomed on either side, their branches clawing at the sky. The radio played a static-laden country song, the only station that came through this far out. I tried to focus on the music, but a sense of unease settled in my stomach. 15 minutes into the drive, I saw him, a figure standing on the side of the road, thumb outstretched, illuminated briefly by my headlights. He was young, maybe in his mid-20s, with dark hair and a worn leather jacket. His eyes, as they met mine, were hauntingly desperate. Instinct told me to keep driving, but something in his gaze made me slow down. I pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. He jogged to the passenger side and leaned in through the open window. "Thank you so much," he said, his voice breathless. "I didn't think anyone would stop." "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Just up the road a bit. My car broke down," he replied, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Name's Jake." "Lily," I introduced myself, unlocking the door. He climbed in, and I resumed driving. The silence between us was thick, the air heavy with unspoken questions. I could feel him watching me, his presence unsettling. "So, what were you doing out here so late?" I asked, hoping to break the tension. "Visiting a friend," he said quickly. "But it got late and I needed to get home. You know how it is." I nodded, though I didn't. Something about his story didn't add up, but I didn't press further. Instead, I focused on the road, counting the minutes until I could drop him off and be on my way. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The radio had turned to static, the country song long gone. Jake fidgeted in his seat, his gaze darting to the rearview mirror repeatedly. "Are you okay?" I asked, unable to ignore his unease any longer. "Yeah, just paranoid, I guess. It's not safe out here at night," he replied, his voice strained. "You're telling me," I muttered. "So, where exactly do you need to go?" "Just up ahead," he said, pointing to a dark, narrow road that branched off the highway. "Turn here." I hesitated but followed his direction. The road was barely more than a dirt path, the trees closing in around us. My headlights barely penetrated the thick darkness, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Jake, this doesn't seem right. Are you sure?" "Stop the car," he interrupted, his voice urgent. "Please, just stop." I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt. Jake was out of the car before I could say another word, disappearing into the woods. I sat there stunned, my heart pounding. What the hell just happened? Minutes passed, and Jake didn't return. Panic set in. I couldn't stay here. I needed to get out. As I reached for the gear shift, the passenger door opened, and Jake reappeared, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "We need to go, now," he said, his voice trembling. Without waiting for an explanation, I floored the gas pedal, the car lurching forward. The trees blurred past, and I fought to keep the car on the narrow path. "Jake, what's going on?" I demanded. I can't explain, just keep driving," he replied, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. I didn't need to be told twice. The sense of dread that had been building all night was now overwhelming. Something was out there, something terrifying, and I didn't want to find out what. We burst back onto the main highway, the relief of open space short-lived as I glanced in the rearview mirror. Headlights appeared behind us, growing closer with alarming speed. "They found me," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "Who found you?" I shouted, my panic rising. "The ones who killed me," he replied, his eyes filled with terror. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. "Killed him? Was this some kind of sick joke? The car behind us sped up, its headlights blindingly bright. It swerved erratically, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. "Drive faster!" Jake yelled. I pushed the pedal to the floor, the engine roaring in protest. The car shuddered as we hit a pothole, but I didn't dare slow down. The pursuing vehicle was almost on top of us now, its headlights reflecting in my side mirrors. "Take the next left," Jake instructed, his voice urgent. I obeyed, barely making the turn. The car skidded, and I fought to regain control. We were on another dark, narrow road, the trees pressing in from all sides. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Someplace safe," Jake replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. The road twisted and turned, the headlights behind us growing more distant. I dared to hope we might lose them, but the road suddenly ended at a small, dilapidated house. "Stop here," Jake said, jumping out before the car had fully stopped. I followed, my legs trembling. The house looked abandoned, its windows dark and boarded up. Jake ran to the door, yanking it open and gesturing for me to follow. Inside, the house was as decrepit as it looked from the outside. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Jake led me to a small room at the back, where a single candle flickered on a wooden table. "Sit," he said, his voice firm. I sat, my mind racing. Jake stood by the window, peering out into the darkness. "They'll be here soon," he said, more to himself than to me. "Jake, what's going on?" I demanded. "Who are they? And what did you mean when you said they killed you?" Jake turned to face me, his expression haunted. "I was killed on this highway a year ago," he began. "Hit and run. They left me to die, and I've been stuck here ever since, trying to find a way to move on. But they keep coming back, tormenting me, stopping me from finding peace." I stared at him, my mind reeling. Ghosts? Tormentors? It sounded insane, but the fear in his eyes was real. "Why me?" I asked. "Why did you get in my car?" "Because you're the first person who's been able to see me," he replied. "You're my only hope." Before I could respond, the sound of an engine roared outside. The headlights of the pursuing car shone through the window, casting long shadows across the room. "They're here," Jake whispered, his face pale. The front door burst open and two figures stepped inside. They looked ordinary enough, but their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their faces twisted into cruel smiles. "Jake," one of them sneered, "still trying to escape?" "You can't stop me," Jake replied, his voice trembling but defiant. The second figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "We've stopped you before. We'll do it again." I stood up, my legs shaking. "Leave him alone," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The figures turned their gaze to me, their eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" the first one asked, stepping closer. "Someone who's not afraid of you," I replied, though my heart pounded in my chest. The second figure laughed again. "Brave words. But this doesn't concern you. Leave now and we might let you go." I glanced at Jake, who shook his head slightly. "No," I said firmly, "I'm not leaving." The first figure lunged at me, but Jake stepped in front, his form flickering like a fading hologram. The figure passed through him, stumbling back in surprise. "You can't hurt her," Jake said, his voice gaining strength. "She's not part of this." The figures hissed, their eyes glowing brighter. "Then we'll make her part of it." They advanced, but Jake raised his hand, a bright light emanating from his palm. The figures recoiled, their expressions twisting in pain. "Go," Jake shouted at me. "Run!" I hesitated, torn between fleeing and helping him. But the light was growing brighter, filling the room with a blinding radiance. The figures screamed, their forms disintegrating in the light. "Run," Jake repeated, his voice echoing in my mind. I turned and fled, bursting out of the house and into the night. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. The engine roared to life and I sped away, the house disappearing in the rearview mirror. I drove for what felt like hours, not daring to slow down. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. Finally, I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands still trembling. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figures behind me. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the fading night. Jake's words echoed in my mind, "You're my only hope." I didn't know if he had succeeded in finding peace, but I hoped he had. He deserved that much. As the sun rose, I took a deep breath and started the car again. I had a long drive ahead of me, but the night was over, and with it, the terror that had chased me. I didn't look back. The highway stretched ahead and I drove on, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the trees, guiding me home. I was a traveling salesman, the kind of guy who spends more nights in motel rooms than his own bed. My wife, Sarah, had long since gotten used to my absences, but that didn't make it any easier. Tonight, I was headed home after a long week on the road. The clock on the dashboard read 11:32 p.m., and I still had a couple of hours to go. The highway was empty, a dark ribbon stretching endlessly ahead, and I was exhausted. I'd driven this route 100 times, but tonight, in a bid to shave off some time, I decided to take a shortcut through the backcountry. It was a route I'd only taken once before, years ago, but I remembered it being quicker. As I turned onto the narrow, winding road, a sense of unease settled over me, but I shook it off. It was just the fatigue playing tricks on my mind. The night was pitch black, and the trees on either side of the road loomed like silent sentinels. My headlights cut through the darkness, revealing the occasional deer or raccoon. The road twisted and turned, and I had to slow down to navigate the sharp curves. About half an hour into the drive, I saw them. At first, they were just 2 pinpricks of light in the distance, but they quickly grew brighter. Headlights. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and the sudden appearance of one behind me was unsettling. The road was too narrow for them to pass, so I figured they'd just have to follow until it widened out. The car behind me maintained its distance for a while, but then it started to close in. I glanced in the rearview mirror, squinting against the glare of their high beams. The lights were blinding, and I raised my hand to shield my eyes. "What the hell?" I muttered, tapping the brakes to signal them to back off. They didn't. Instead, the lights grew closer, almost tailgating me now. My pulse quickened, and I could feel a bead of sweat trickle down my back. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us, but the other car matched my speed effortlessly. Panic set in as the lights seemed to grow even brighter, filling the entire mirror, obscuring everything else. "Back off," I shouted, though I knew they couldn't hear me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I floored the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest. The road was treacherous, and I had to concentrate to keep from skidding off into the trees. I took a sharp turn, the tires screeching, and for a moment, the headlights disappeared from the mirror. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But my relief was short-lived. The lights reappeared, this time even closer. It was as if they'd materialized out of thin air. Fear turned to anger, and I gritted my teeth. "Fine, you want to play games?" I muttered, taking another turn even faster. The lights kept pace, unwavering. My mind raced. Who were they? What did they want? I didn't have any enemies that I knew of, and this stretch of road was too remote for a random encounter. The thought crossed my mind that it might be some sort of prank, but it felt too sinister for that. I glanced at the clock. 12:15 a.m. I'd been driving this hellish route for what felt like an eternity. The car behind me showed no signs of stopping. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Then, I noticed something odd. The lights weren't just following me, they were echoing my every move. When I swerved, they swerved. When I accelerated, they accelerated. It was as if they were tethered to me, mirroring my actions perfectly. As the minutes ticked by, the realization slowly dawned on me. These weren't just ordinary headlights. They were too bright, too relentless, too unnatural. I remembered the stories I'd heard from locals about this road, tales of ghost cars and haunted highways. I'd always dismissed them as nonsense, but now, a shiver ran down my spine. Could it be? Was I being chased by something not of this world? I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought. I needed to focus. Ghosts or not, I had to find a way out of this. I scanned the road ahead, looking for any sign of escape, but it was just an endless stretch of black asphalt and towering trees. Suddenly, the road began to climb, winding up a steep hill. I seized the opportunity, pushing the car harder. The engine whined in protest, but I didn't care. If I could reach the top, maybe I could lose them on the descent. The car behind me followed, the lights unwavering. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my vision blurring from the intensity of the glare. And then I saw it. For a brief moment, as the road curved, the lights shifted, and I caught a glimpse of the car. It was an old, battered vehicle, the kind you'd see in a junkyard. but it was the figures inside that made my blood run cold. They were pale, almost translucent, their eyes glowing with an eerie light, and they were staring right at me. I tore my eyes away from the mirror, focusing on the road. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Ghosts. It had to be. But why? Why were they after me? The road leveled out, and I pushed the car harder, the speedometer inching towards the red. The lights behind me flickered, and for a moment, I thought I might have lost them. But then they reappeared, closer than ever. I couldn't keep this up. My car was old, and I didn't know how much more it could take. I needed a plan. Fast. Up ahead, I saw a turnoff, a narrow dirt road branching off from the main route. It was a gamble, but I had no other choice. I yanked the wheel, the tires skidding on the gravel as I made the sharp turn. The dirt road was even more treacherous, full of potholes and overgrown with weeds. I bounced and jolted, struggling to keep control. The headlights behind me vanished, and for a brief, blissful moment, I thought I was free. But then they reappeared, as if they'd never left. The ghost car was relentless, and it was gaining on me. The dirt road ended abruptly at a clearing, and I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. I had nowhere else to go. The ghost car pulled up behind me, its headlights flooding the clearing with an unnatural light. I got out of the car, my legs trembling. There was no point in running. I had to face whatever this was head on. The ghostly figures emerged from the car, their forms flickering like old film reels. They moved towards me, their eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" One of the figures stepped forward, its face twisted in a grimace of pain and anger. "You took the shortcut," it said, its voice a hollow echo. "This road is ours." "I didn't know," I stammered. "I didn't mean any harm." The figure's eyes bore into mine, and I felt a wave of sorrow and rage wash over me. "We died here," it said. "Trapped in a loop, forever chasing, forever pursued. You cannot escape." I took a step back, my heart pounding. "There has to be a way," I said desperately. "A way to end this." The figure shook its head. "You must join us," it said. "Only then will you understand." "No!" I shouted, backing away. "I won't." The figures advanced, their forms flickering and shifting. I could feel their cold presence, their anger, their despair. I turned and ran, but I knew it was futile. There was no escape from this nightmare. As I stumbled through the clearing, the ground beneath me seemed to shift and warp. I fell, the world spinning around me. When I looked up, the ghostly figures were standing over me, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. "You cannot run," the lead figure said. "You must face the truth." "What truth?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure reached out, its cold hand touching my forehead. Suddenly, I was engulfed in a whirlwind of images and sensations. I saw the road, the crash, the twisted metal and broken bodies. I felt the pain, the fear, the hopelessness, and then I understood. I was one of them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I remembered the crash, the way my car had skidded off the road, the impact as it slammed into a tree. I remembered the darkness, the cold, the feeling of being trapped. I had died on this road, just like them. The ghostly figures stepped back, their expressions softer now, less angry. "You see," the lead figure said, "we are all bound to this place." I nodded, the weight of the truth settling over me. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't understand." The figure nodded. "Now you do, and now you are one of us." I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear and panic were gone, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I was part of this place now, part of the endless chase. As the dawn began to break, the ghostly figures faded, leaving me alone in the clearing. I looked down at my hands, seeing them flicker and shift, becoming less solid, more ethereal. I walked back to the car, my movements slow and deliberate. I could feel the connection to the road, to the other spirits trapped here. I knew what I had to do. I got into the car and started the engine. The headlights pierced the fading darkness as I pulled back onto the road. I drove, feeling the pull of the highway, the endless loop that would be my eternity. And as the first light of day crept over the horizon, I saw the lights in the rearview mirror. The chase was on. It was supposed to be a simple family road trip, a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of our daily lives and enjoy some quality time together. My wife Mary, Our two kids, Josh and Emily, and I were headed to a cabin in the mountains, far away from the city's noise and stress. The kids were excited, chattering away in the back seat, and even though the drive was long, the anticipation of a peaceful weekend kept us all in good spirits. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the road, I realized we were running low on gas. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forests and winding roads. I glanced at Mary, who was looking at the map on her phone, trying to find the nearest gas station. "There's one coming up in a few miles," she said, pointing to a small dot on the screen. "It's a bit off the main road, but it's our best bet." I nodded, relieved. The last thing we needed was to get stranded out here with no cell service. I took the next exit and followed the narrow road that led deeper into the woods. The further we went, the darker it got, the trees closing in on us like an impenetrable wall. After what felt like an eternity, we saw it, a flickering neon sign that read, "Gas." The station was old and run down, with a single pump and a small convenience store. It looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years, but at this point we had no choice. I pulled up to the pump and got out, the cool night air sending a shiver down my spine. The place was eerily silent, save for the distant chirping of crickets. I picked up the nozzle and started filling the tank, glancing around nervously. "Daddy, I need to use the bathroom," Emily said from the back seat. "Me too," Josh chimed in. I looked at Mary, who shrugged. "I'll take them inside," she said. "Maybe we can grab some snacks for the road." I watched them walk towards the store, the old wooden door creaking as they pushed it open. The light inside was dim, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. I finished pumping the gas and went to join them, but as I reached the door, something made me stop. A feeling, a whisper at the back of my mind telling me to turn around and leave. I shook it off and stepped inside. The interior of the store was just as decrepit as the outside. Shelves lined with expired products, a thick layer of dust covering everything. At the counter stood an old man, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a greasy baseball cap. He watched us with an unsettling intensity as we moved through the aisles. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just getting some gas and letting the kids use the restroom." The old man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Restrooms in the back," he said, his voice a low rasp. "But be quick about it. This ain't a place to linger." I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. Mary took the kids to the restroom, while I grabbed a couple of snacks and a bottle of water. I walked up to the counter, placing the items down. "Long way from home, aren't you?" the old man asked, his eyes piercing into mine. "Yeah, just passing through," I replied, forcing a smile. He nodded again, ringing up the items with deliberate slowness. "Best be on your way soon," he said, handing me the receipt. "The roads aren't safe at night." I frowned, about to ask what he meant, but Mary and the kids returned, and the moment passed. We quickly made our way back to the car, the old man's warning echoing in my mind. We drove away from the gas station, the darkness swallowing us once again. The road seemed even narrower now, the trees pressing in closer. I kept my eyes on the road, but something felt off. The gas station's neon sign had vanished from the rearview mirror far too quickly, as if it had never been there at all. The kids were quiet in the back seat, an unusual stillness that made me uneasy. I glanced at Mary, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. The tension in the car was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we continued down the road, I noticed something strange. The trees looked familiar, too familiar. The bends in the road, the way the branches hung overhead, it all seemed the same as before. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but when the flickering neon sign of the gas station came into view again, my heart skipped a beat. "Didn't we just leave that place?" Mary asked, her voice tense. "Yeah," I said, my throat dry. "We did." I pulled up to the pump, hoping that maybe I had just gotten turned around. But as soon as we stepped out of the car, the old man appeared at the door, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Back so soon?" he asked, a knowing smile on his lips. This time, I didn't bother with the snacks. I walked straight up to the counter, my frustration bubbling over. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. "We just left this place." The old man didn't seem surprised. He simply nodded, as if he had been expecting this. "Sometimes the road plays tricks," he said cryptically. "Keeps travelers from moving on." "What do you mean?" I asked, my anger giving way to fear. "Some roads," he said slowly, They don't let you go. They keep you trapped, looping back over and over. This here is one of those roads. I felt a chill run down my spine. How do we get out? The old man's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of pity. You need to break the pattern, he said. Find what's keeping you here and change it. Otherwise, you'll never leave. I wanted to ask more, but Mary called out to me, her voice tinged with panic. I turned to see her standing by the door, the kids clinging to her legs. We need to go, she said urgently. Now. I nodded, thanking the old man even though his words had only added to my confusion. We hurried back to the car and drove off, the gas station disappearing into the night once more. We tried everything, different turns, different speeds, even stopping to rest for a while. But no matter what we did, we always ended up back at the gas station. Each time the old man was there, watching us with that same knowing smile. The kids were getting scared and I couldn't blame them. The endless loop was starting to wear on all of us. Mary was trying to stay calm, but I could see the fear in her eyes. What do we do? She asked as we pulled up to the gas station for what felt like the 100th time. I don't know, I admitted, feeling helpless. But we have to keep trying. This time I decided to take a different approach. Instead of talking to the old man, I started looking around the gas station, searching for anything out of the ordinary. I checked the pump, the shelves, even the restroom, but everything seemed normal. As I was about to give up, I noticed something strange behind the counter. A small, dusty photo frame, half hidden by a stack of old newspapers. I picked it up, wiping away the grime to reveal a faded photograph of a family standing in front of the gas station. The old man was there, younger and happier, along with a woman and a little girl. Who are they? I asked, holding up the photo. The old man's expression darkened, his eyes filled with a sorrow I hadn't seen before. My family, he said quietly. This place took them from me. I felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry. He nodded, his gaze distant. It's been so long since anyone cared. Maybe that's why the road won't let you go. It wants you to understand. I stared at the old man, the pieces slowly coming together. The gas station, the loops, the sorrow in his eyes. It all made sense now. The road wasn't just keeping us trapped. It was trying to tell us something, to make us see what we'd been missing. We need to help him, I said to Mary as we got back in the car. Help him? How? She asked, confused. I'm not sure, but I think it has to do with his family. Maybe if we can find a way to give him some closure, the road will let us go. Mary looked skeptical but nodded. It's worth a try. We drove off again, this time with a plan. We'd find out more about the old man and his family, and hopefully we'd figure out what needed to be done. As we drove, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We weren't just aimlessly looping anymore. We had a goal. Back at the gas station, I approached the old man with the photo in hand. Tell me about your family, I said gently. The old man looked at the photo, his eyes widening with recognition. He took it from me with trembling hands, his face a mixture of sorrow and longing. Where did you find this? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. In an old radio, I replied. It belonged to Eleanor. She asked for my help. The old man's eyes filled with tears as he looked at me. Eleanor was my grandmother, he said. She disappeared during a live broadcast in 1935. No one ever found out what happened to her. I felt a chill run down my spine. I think she was trapped in the radio, I said. She asked me to set her free. The old man nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. Thank you, he whispered. You've given my family closure. As I left the gas station, I felt a sense of fulfillment. I had helped Eleanor and her family find peace, but I knew my journey wasn't over. There were others out there, other voices waiting to be heard. A few weeks later, I received a call from a woman named Margaret. She had heard about my encounter with the haunted radio and wanted my help. She had inherited an old music box from her grandmother, and ever since, she had been hearing strange whispers at night. Intrigued, I agreed to meet with her. When I arrived at her home, she greeted me with a nervous smile. Thank you for coming, she said. I didn't know who else to turn to. Margaret led me to the music box, a beautifully crafted antique with intricate engravings. As I approached, I felt a familiar chill in the air. Tell me about your grandmother, I said. Margaret's eyes filled with sadness. She was a pianist, she said. She loved music more than anything, but she died under mysterious circumstances. I always felt like there was something unfinished, something she needed to say. I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Let's see if we can help her. I wound the music box and let it play. The soft, haunting melody filled the room, and soon the whispers began. At first, they were indistinct, but gradually they grew clearer. "Margaret," the voice whispered. "It's me. I'm here." Margaret's eyes widened, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," the voice replied. "I've been waiting for this moment. I need you to know that I'm at peace. But there's something you need to find, something I left behind." "What is it?" Margaret asked, her voice choked with emotion. "A letter," the voice said. "It's hidden in the old piano. It will explain everything." Margaret and I searched the old piano, and, sure enough, we found a hidden compartment containing a letter. Inside, her grandmother had written about her life, her love for music, and her regret over unfinished compositions. She had also left behind the sheet music for a final piece, one she had never performed. Margaret and I sat down at the piano and played the piece together. As the last notes faded, the air seemed to clear, and a sense of peace settled over the room. Her grandmother's spirit had found closure, and so had Margaret. Word of my encounter spread, and soon I was contacted by people from all over, each with their own haunted object and a story to tell. I became a sort of supernatural detective, helping lost souls find peace and bringing closure to their loved ones. Each case was different, but the underlying theme was always the same. These spirits had something important to say, something that needed to be heard. I listened, guided by the voices that reached out from the other side. One day I received a package in the mail. Inside was an old pocket watch and a letter from a man named Henry. He had recently lost his father and believed the watch was connected to his spirit. As I held the watch, I felt a familiar chill and knew that another story was waiting to be uncovered. With each new case, I grew more attuned to the whispers of the past, more skilled at unraveling the mysteries that haunted these objects. And with each story, I felt a deeper connection to the world beyond, a sense of purpose that guided my every step. Years passed, and my reputation as a seeker of lost souls grew. I had helped countless spirits find peace, but there was always a part of me that felt incomplete, as if I were still searching for something. One night, as I was organizing my collection, I found a small, dusty box tucked away in a corner. Inside was a locket and a faded photograph of a young woman. The moment I touched the locket, I felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. The woman in the photograph looked familiar, and as I stared at her, a voice filled my mind. "You've been searching for me," it said. "I've been waiting for you." My heart raced as I realized the voice belonged to my own grandmother. She had died when I was a child, and her spirit had been with me all along, guiding me on my journey. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, tears filling my eyes. "I needed you to find your own path," she replied, "to help others as you've helped me. But now, it's time for us to find peace together." With trembling hands, I opened the locket. Inside was a tiny handwritten note. It was a message from my grandmother, a final piece of the puzzle that had haunted me for so long. As I read her words, I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of completion. My journey had come full circle, and I had finally found the closure I had been searching for. Years later, I passed my collection and my knowledge to a new generation of seekers. I trained them to listen to the whispers, to help those who had been forgotten. My story became a part of their legacy, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, there is always a light waiting to be found. And as I watched them continue the work I had started, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that the voices would always be heard, their stories never forgotten. The radio's lament had been just the beginning, a gateway to a world of mystery and wonder that would continue to unfold, one story at a time.